Ned Stark felt the cold bite of steel against his neck, the crowd's roar swelling into a tide of dread. But this time he didn't fall. Somehow, a misstep by the executioner, or perhaps a cruel twist of fate, spared him the blow. Shock froze the people around him for a heartbeat, then panic erupted. Guards shouted, but Ned, gripping the edge of the platform, steadied himself and scanned the crowd. His eyes met Sansa's. She had grown pale, but relief flickered there. Jon and Eddard were hidden somewhere behind the crowd, safe for now. In the chaos, Ned moved fast. He barked orders to the men he could trust, sucking his small retinue. The executioner tried to strike again, but Ned sidestepped, using his long blade to disarm the man. A few loyal guards, some from the City Watch, some Knights of the Vale who had heard rumors of treachery, stepped forward to back him. Before Robert's death could be avenged in the streets by Lannister swords, Ned vanished into the twisting alleys of King's Landing, blending into shadows and chaos. The city itself seemed to reel from disbelief. Whispers spread like wildfire. Ned Stark survived. Word reached Cersei Lannister and her son, the young King Joffrey. Fury twisted Cersei's features. The queen, who had thought herself untouchable, suddenly realized that the man she thought dead could rise against her. Joffrey, unused to defiance, trembled, the crown feeling heavier than ever. Every alley and street in the city held the potential for rebellion, and the Stark banners hidden among the faithful now glimmered with new hope. Ned's first instinct was to secure his family. Sansa and Eddard were smuggled out by loyal servants through secret passages known only to those who had served the Starks for decades. Jon, still a boy at the wall, received a message via Raven. He was to return not as a bastard, but as heir to Winterfell, though the North remained wary of the Lannister grip. Ned's survival alone could spark defiance across the kingdoms, but he knew that raw defiance would not be enough. He needed alliances, intelligence, and cunning, things he had relied on in Winterfell, but never against the cunning of the Lannisters in their home city. By nightfall, Ned found refuge in a hidden corner of King's Landing, in the abandoned chambers of an old sept. With the city sleeping uneasily above him, he considered his next moves. Turpin Lannister, known for his cleverness, had been exiled once before, but now could be a potential ally or a trap. Varys, the Spider of Whispers, might offer information and secret assistance if approached correctly. Ned, who had always believed in honor and duty, now realized that honor alone would not save the kingdom. Survival demanded a careful blend of strategy and morality, and for the first time, he contemplated choices he would once have called sun-rubbed. Outside, the streets were restless. Rumors of Ned's miraculous escape spread, emboldening small pockets of rebellion. Common folk, long suffering under the tax burdens and corruption of King's Landing, whispered the Stark name with hope. Even some of the city's mercenaries, uncertain of loyalties, began questioning which side to choose. Ned knew that timing was everything. A single misstep could allow Cersei to tighten her grip, using fear and cruelty as weapons. Yet the Stark spirit, stoic, resilient, and unyielding, was still alive, and Ned was determined to wield it. As the first moonlight fell through broken windows, Ned allowed himself a quiet moment. He thought of Winterfell, of the North, and of the promises he had made to those who trusted him. The Lannisters had underestimated him. They had assumed honor would chain him, that their treachery would end him like so many others. But Ned Stark was not so easily broken. In the coming days, he would strike not with blind fury, but with the careful precision of a wolf, guiding the pieces of a dangerous game toward justice and revenge. And somewhere deep in his heart, Ned felt a spark of something that had been nearly extinguished: hope. The city never slept, and neither could Ned Stark. By dawn, he had moved through the labyrinthine alleys of King's Landing, careful to avoid the Lannister patrols that now combed the streets, searching for any trace of the man they had assumed dead. He paused in the shadow of an abandoned market, listening to the distant chatter of soldiers and merchants alike. Every face he passed carried fear or curiosity, both dangerous in a city built on secrets and whispers. Ned knew he couldn't act recklessly. One misstep could cost his life and undo any hope of rescuing his family. He thought of Turpin Lannister, the dwarf who had survived schemes that would have killed a lesser man. Turpin's sharp mind could prove invaluable. Ned sent a carefully worded message through a trusted street urchin, offering parley under the promise of mutual survival and opportunity. Meanwhile, he considered Varys, the enigmatic spymaster whose web of intelligence stretched through every corner of the kingdom. If Varys could be persuaded to aid him, Ned might finally gain a foothold in a city dominated by treachery. But trust was a luxury Ned could barely afford. Both men were unpredictable, and any alliance would require cunning as much as honor. In the meantime, Ned's family remained his priority. Sansa had been hidden in the vaults beneath the Red Keep, a secret passage known only to loyal servants. Wild and fearless even as a child, had been spirited away through the city's underbelly. Jon, still a boy with the weight of his identity as a bastard, was on his way back from the Wall, unaware of how drastically fate had shifted. Ned's heart ached with worry, but he forced himself to focus on strategy. Panic was the luxury of those already doomed. He would not fall into that trap. With the first rays of sunlight illuminating the rooftops, Ned began to formulate a plan. He needed to send messages to the north, to Winterfell, and to allies who could help contain the Lannister power. The city might still tremble under Sansa's rule, but the Starks had long memories, and the North remembered loyalty and vengeance in equal measure. Ned's survival was a spark that could ignite rebellion, but he had to fan it carefully, ensuring the fire didn't consume those he loved most. Meanwhile, Cersei Lannister raged in the Red Keep. The Queen had always relied on fear, but now fear itself had become unpredictable. Her son, Joffrey, screamed at his advisors, his tantrums masking a growing unease. Every whisper in the city seemed to carry Ned's name, and Cersei realized that the man she had tried to eliminate could destabilize the crown entirely. Her spies scoured the streets, but rumors, shadows, and clever misdirection kept Ned one step ahead. The Stark name carried weight, and in a city built on corruption, that weight could bend loyalties. By nightfall, Ned had secured a hidden base in the depths of an old sept, far from the prying eyes of Lannister soldiers. From there, he coordinated with loyalists and sent coded messages to the north. He instructed Sansa and Arya on stealth and caution, emphasizing patience over rash action. The Stark children were resilient, but even resilience could falter under exposure. Ned's careful guidance ensured they remained safe, even as King's Landing simmered with tension and uncertainty. As the days passed, small victories began to appear. Merchants sympathetic to the Stark cause provided supplies. Minor nobles, disillusioned with Lannister cruelty, offered discreet support. Ned used every ounce of his influence and cunning to manipulate the city's power structure subtly, turning fear against Cersei without revealing his hand fully. Each move was calculated, each alliance fragile, but momentum was building. The people, sensing hope where none had existed, whispered the Stark name with reverence and fear in equal measure. Ned Stark, once thought dead, now became a shadow over King's Landing, a symbol of survival, resilience, and imminent reckoning. He knew the coming weeks would test him beyond anything he had faced in Winterfell, but he was ready. For his family, for the North, and for the justice that had been denied him, Ned would move carefully, decisively, and without mercy. The city might be corrupt, the crown unjust, and enemies numerous, but Ned Stark was alive, and that alone was enough to change everything. Ned Stark knew that surviving was only the first step. The real battle lay ahead. King's Landing was a city of whispers, betrayal, and shifting loyalties. Even among the nobility, fear kept many quiet, while ambition twisted others into dangerous opponents. Ned realized that brute force alone would not win this fight. He needed strategy, patience, and leverage. Every move had to be calculated, every ally carefully chosen, and every secret weapon used at precisely the right moment. He began by reaching out to minor nobles and disaffected members of the king's court. Many had grown weary of Cersei's cruelty and Joffrey's childish tyranny. Whispers of Ned's survival spread, carried by trusted messengers and disguised letters. Some laughed at the notion of the dead man walking, but others saw opportunity, a chance to align with a Stark, whose name carried honor and fear alike. Ned listened more than he spoke, learning who might be useful and who could be a threat. Trust was precious, but sometimes even enemies could be leveraged if handled with care. Meanwhile, he had to secure the city's streets. Ned knew the common folk could be both allies and obstacles. He sent small groups of loyalists to protect key areas and remove Lannister enforcers without causing overt chaos. The city's markets, docks, and alleys became subtly aligned with him, though the Lannisters still believed him dead. Each successful maneuver emboldened Ned and his supporters. Word spread quietly. The man who had been betrayed by the crown now moved unseen, shaping the city to his will. Sansa and Arya were growing in confidence under Ned's careful guidance. Sansa learned the art of reading people, listening for lies, and identifying hidden intentions. Arya, fierce and untamed, trained in stealth, observation, and defensive combat. Both were becoming sharp instruments in Ned's strategy. He instructed them not to act recklessly. Patience was key. Even small mistakes could unravel months of careful planning. Their safety was paramount, and every lesson was a preparation for the larger conflict looming over the capital. In the shadows, Ned reached out to Tyrion Lannister. The dwarf had survived countless schemes by leveraging his wit and intellect. At first, Tyrion hesitated, wary of the Starks' intentions, but Ned's sincerity, coupled with subtle pressure regarding shared enemies in the Lannister family, convinced him. Tyrion became a crucial source of intelligence, guiding Ned through the treacherous web of court politics. With Varys providing information from deeper shadows, Ned now had insight into nearly every corner of the city. No secret, no movement, no scheme could escape his awareness for long. But not all encounters were friendly. Ned discovered pockets of Lannister loyalists determined to eliminate him. Assassins sent through the night barely missed him in narrow alleys, and attempts to poison supplies tested his vigilance. Each threat reminded him of the stakes. Failure was no longer an abstract concept. It would mean death for him, his family, and countless allies who had placed their trust in the Starks. He sharpened his blade, honed his instincts, and moved like a predator among prey, calculating every step, every decision. As Ned consolidated power in subtle ways, Cersei grew increasingly paranoid. Her attempts to locate him were met with dead ends. She relied on fear and coercion, but the city was slipping from her control. Every whisper of rebellion, every secret alliance, and every successful evasion chipped away at her authority. Her advisors argued over strategy, while she seethed, realizing that the man she had dismissed as dead was systematically reclaiming influence. The streets, once hers to dominate, now whispered the name of the wolf who survived betrayal. Ned began planning his first overt move. He would not charge blindly into the Red Keep. That would be folly. Instead, he envisioned a sequence of strikes that would destabilize the crown without risking his family or the people he sought to protect. Each plan relied on intelligence, stealth, and the careful placement of allies throughout the city. His strategy was a web, each thread reinforcing the others, ready to ensnare those who had underestimated him. For the first time since arriving in King's Landing, Ned allowed himself a small measure of grim satisfaction. The man who had been betrayed, humiliated, and left for dead was now alive, active, and plotting. The city, the crown, and the Lannisters would soon discover that survival was only the beginning, and vengeance, when tempered with cunning, could be devastatingly effective. Ned Stark's first move had to be precise. The Lannisters controlled the Red Keep, the city guard, and most of the influential nobles, but they were overconfident, convinced he had been eliminated. He began with small, strategic strikes designed to weaken their hold without exposing himself. Secretly, loyal guards sabotaged supply lines, while carefully chosen rumors sowed distrust among Cersei's inner circle. Every act was subtle, yet each ripple shook the foundation of Lannister power. He started by targeting the City Watch. Many captains were dissatisfied with their orders, weary of enforcing Joffrey's cruel whims. Ned approached them quietly, offering the chance to side with him and preserve their positions or risk destruction once his influence became undeniable. A few were hesitant at first, bound by fear or previous loyalty, but Ned's reputation as a fair and honorable leader carried weight even in King's Landing. By the end of the week, he had discreet allies in key posts throughout the city. Meanwhile, Sansa and Arya continued to learn and assist. Sansa, clever and patient, began passing information between Ned and his allies, disguised in coded letters hidden in the servant networks. Arya moved through the shadows, gathering intelligence on patrols, Lannister loyalists, and hidden passageways. The girls' contributions were small yet crucial. Ned knew he could trust them in ways he could not yet trust others. Their courage and ingenuity became a hidden strength in his campaign, one that would grow in importance as the stakes rose. Ned also reached out to House Tyrell. The Reach had long been resentful of Lannister dominance, and Olenna Tyrell, the Queen of Thorns, was both cunning and ruthless. He sent careful messages appealing to mutual interest. The Lannisters had overreached, and cooperation with the North could benefit the Reach in ways the Crown never anticipated. It was a delicate balance, for revealing too much of his plans could backfire, yet the offer was too enticing for Tyrell to ignore. Soon, discreet envoys moved between the two houses, preparing for a coordinated effort to weaken Cersei's position. Even within the Red Keep, cracks began to appear. Littlefinger, ever ambitious, noticed the stirrings of unrest. He approached Ned under the guise of neutrality, offering intelligence in exchange for future favor. Ned accepted cautiously, aware that Littlefinger's loyalty was always to himself. Still, information was power, and Ned would use it to dismantle Lannister control piece by piece. Each ally, no matter how untrustworthy, became a tool if handled wisely. Tyrion's role grew increasingly important. His insight into the Lannisters' weaknesses was invaluable, revealing hidden alliances, secret fears, and points of tension. He advised on the timing of actions, ensuring that Ned's strikes would maximize confusion without risking unnecessary exposure. With Tyrion and Varys providing a network of knowledge and intrigue, Ned's position in the city became less that of a hunted man and more of a shadow king, invisible yet influential. The first open act of defiance came with precision. In a crowded market, a shipment intended for the Lannisters was quietly redirected, its loss blamed on incompetent guards. Panic rippled through their ranks, whispers questioning loyalty and competence spreading faster than Ned could have hoped. The Lannisters reacted with fear and anger, tightening control in some areas while leaving others vulnerable. Every move Ned orchestrated made him less a hunted man and more a ghost of vengeance, unseen yet always present. Even as he struck against the Lannisters, Ned maintained focus on his ultimate goal, rescuing his family and reclaiming control of the kingdom. Each victory strengthened morale among his allies, while sowing confusion and fear among his enemies. Ned Stark, once thought dead, was proving that survival was only the beginning. The streets of King's Landing were no longer entirely Cersei's, and the first threads of rebellion were quietly knitting themselves into a tapestry of revolt. As night fell over the city, Ned allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. He had survived betrayal, manipulated allies and enemies alike, and made his first visible moves against the crown. But he knew the Lannisters would not take these setbacks lightly. Every action now had consequences, and every misstep could undo months of careful planning. Still, for the first time since that executioner's blade had failed him, Ned Stark felt that the tide might finally be turning in his favor. The city's tension thickened with each passing day. Word of Ned Stark's survival had spread beyond whispers, carried by merchants, servants, and desperate nobles hoping to see a change in power. Now, the Lannisters were starting to take notice. Cersei's paranoia had transformed into calculated fury. She convened her council in the Red Keep, her face pale with rage, while Joffrey stomped about like a child desperate to assert dominance. Every guard, every ally, and every whisper in King's Landing was now suspect. Cersei ordered patrols to sweep the alleys where Ned's supporters had been seen. Her spies worked day and night, using bribes, threats, and torture to extract information. Yet Ned had planned for this. His loyalists moved carefully, leaving false trails, creating confusion, and feeding misinformation back to the Queen. The city itself became a maze of deception, and the Lannisters found themselves struggling to differentiate friend from foe. Every misstep they took, every decision driven by fear, played into Ned's hands. Ned knew the Lannisters would eventually strike directly. He began positioning his allies to anticipate their moves. Soldiers loyal to him secretly patrolled key districts, watching for suspicious activity. Sansa and Arya, hidden but active, continued gathering intelligence and relaying it through safe channels. Arya had grown bold, sneaking close to Lannister patrols to observe their routines, while Sansa's calm and careful demeanor ensured the flow of information remained steady. Ned marveled at their growth, proud yet vigilant, knowing the stakes had never been higher. The first major confrontation came one stormy night. A group of Lannister soldiers, sent to root out Ned's network, attempted to ambush one of his loyalist cells near the city's docks. Ned, informed ahead of time by his network of spies and scouts, orchestrated a counterattack. The Loyalists struck swiftly and decisively, capturing the soldiers and sending them back with false stories of a larger force waiting to strike. Panic spread among the ranks of the city guards. Rumors of Stark vengeance circulated like wildfire. Ned had turned the tables without revealing his presence directly. Meanwhile, Cersei's frustration grew unbearable. She realized that whoever had survived was not just alive, but clever and methodical. She summoned her advisors, demanding strategies to eliminate him, but fear and distrust prevented them from acting effectively. Every suggestion seemed inadequate, and every action taken in haste created more problems than it solved. Even Jaime Lannister, torn between loyalty to his family and his own moral compass, began questioning the stability of their rule. Ned's survival was not just a personal threat, it was destabilizing the entire Lannister reign. Ned, however, did not underestimate the danger. He knew that the Lannisters were ruthless and unpredictable. Each act of defiance needed to be carefully calculated, each strike precise and deliberate. He began planning for a larger, more decisive move, a demonstration of power that would shake the city and force the Lannisters to react on his terms. Tyrion and Varys provided intelligence on vulnerabilities within the Red Keep, suggesting possible openings for strategic strikes without exposing his family to risk. The streets of King's Landing grew restless. Citizens, sensing change, whispered Ned's name with cautious hope. Even the common folk, long oppressed by taxes and fear, began to quietly support the Stark cause. Merchants, small guilds, and minor nobles who had felt powerless were emboldened by the ghostly presence of the man who had survived execution. Ned knew that morale was a weapon as potent as any sword. The city's energy was shifting, and with every secretive victory, he gained momentum. By the week's end, Ned's position was stronger than it had been at any point since his escape. He had disrupted Lannister control, protected his family, and expanded his network of loyalists. Yet he remained cautious, aware that the Lannisters would eventually counterattack with full force. Every day was a game of shadows and strategy, where one miscalculation could mean death for him and everyone he sought to protect. As he surveyed the city from a hidden tower, rain pelting the stone walls, Ned Stark allowed himself a moment of reflection. Survival had been only the first step. Now he was shaping the fate of King's Landing itself. The Lannisters believed themselves untouchable, but Ned knew the city's heart, the hearts of its people and its guards, was slowly shifting. He was no longer merely a survivor. He was the shadow of justice stalking those who had betrayed him, and the reckoning was only beginning. Ned Stark's careful planning was beginning to pay off. King's Landing, a city that once seemed impenetrable, was slowly bending to his influence. Street by street, alley by alley, his loyalists moved quietly, removing threats, securing allies, and spreading whispers that unsettled the Lannisters. Fear was no longer the sole weapon of the crown. Now hope and cunning worked as silent allies for the man who had been written off as dead. The next step was decisive. Ned knew he needed to strike where it would hurt the Lannisters the most, their reputation and the stability of their rule. The Red Keep, their symbol of power, had to be shaken without risking a full-scale assault that could endanger innocents or his family. He coordinated with Tyrion and Varys, creating a network of spies and insiders who could manipulate key areas from within. Guards would be misdirected, doors left unlocked, and information planted to create confusion. Every detail had to be perfect. There was no room for error. Arya proved indispensable. Moving silently through the city, she gathered intelligence from places adults could not easily reach. She memorized patrol routines, overheard private conversations, and identified hidden entrances to the Red Keep. Sansa, using her growing skill in diplomacy and subtle manipulation, convinced minor nobles to supply information, weapons, and resources. Together, the girls became vital extensions of Ned's strategy, their courage and intelligence complementing his leadership. Ned also worked to solidify support among the common folk. Markets, taverns, and guilds became channels for information and small acts of defiance. Rumors of a Stark resurgence emboldened citizens who had long been fearful of Lannister wrath. Hidden banners appeared in windows, coded messages were passed discreetly, and small groups of civilians became vigilant allies. Ned knew that when the time came, the city itself could aid him, not just his soldiers. Morale, he realized, could be as effective as swords in toppling a corrupt regime. Meanwhile, the Lannisters grew increasingly desperate. Cersei, realizing that her control was slipping, tightened her grip, relying on intimidation and cruelty. Joffrey lashed out unpredictably, sending guards to enforce loyalty with fear. Yet each act of aggression backfired, further isolating the Queen and King from those they claimed to rule. Jaime, increasingly uneasy with Cersei's methods, began questioning his family's course, though he remained bound by complex loyalties. Ned's survival was creating fractures that no amount of tyranny could repair. Ned orchestrated his first significant display of power. Under the cover of night, key Lannister loyalists were quietly neutralized, their positions filled with those sympathetic to the Starks. False rumors spread through the city that a powerful Stark force had infiltrated the Red Keep itself. Panic spread among the guards and advisors, forcing Cersei to reassign troops and resources haphazardly. Chaos, carefully cultivated, became Ned's ally, weakening his enemies without a single direct confrontation. As the weeks passed, Ned began reclaiming control over key districts in King's Landing. Markets, docks, and minor fortifications fell under his indirect influence. His network of spies and loyalists grew more confident, able to act with precision and subtlety. Even some mercenaries, sensing the shift of power, offered their services secretly to the Starks. The city, once rigidly under Lannister authority, was now a living chessboard, every move calculated to outmaneuver the Queen and her allies. Despite the successes, Ned remained cautious. Each day was a reminder of the stakes. A single misstep could undo everything. He continued training, planning, and guiding Sansa and Arya, knowing that the coming confrontation with the Lannisters would test not only his strategic skill, but the strength of his family and allies. Every victory, every minor triumph, was a step toward the larger reckoning that awaited those who had betrayed him. By the time moonlight bathed the city in silver, Ned Stark allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. The streets whispered his name, the Lannisters felt the cracks forming beneath their feet, and the people dared to hope. The wolf who had survived betrayal was no longer merely surviving. He was preparing to reclaim what had been stolen and punish those who had thought themselves untouchable. King's Landing was no longer a city of fear. It was a city under the watchful, calculating gaze of a Stark alive, patient, and ready. The time for subtlety was ending. Ned Stark knew that King's Landing could only be truly reclaimed when the Lannisters felt the full weight of his presence. For weeks, he had moved like a shadow, weaving alliances, gathering intelligence, and destabilizing the crown's grip. Now it was time for an overt display of power, a calculated strike to show that the man they had tried to kill was not only alive, but ready to take control. Ned's first target was the city guard loyal to the Lannisters. Using information from Tyrion and Arya's observations, he coordinated simultaneous actions across several districts. Key checkpoints were seized quietly in the dead of night, loyalists replacing Lannister sympathizers without drawing attention. False rumors of rebel uprisings amplified the chaos. Guards who remained loyal began to question the strength of their position. Panic and uncertainty rippled through the city, creating cracks for Ned to exploit. In the Red Keep, Cersei was growing increasingly frantic. She ordered Joffrey to confront the city's unrest with brute force, but the king's inexperience and impulsive temper made matters worse. Troops were sent to areas already secured by Ned's loyalists, only to find no resistance and rumors of Stark reinforcements waiting behind every corner. Frustration turned to fear, and fear bred mistrust. Cersei's advisors began to quarrel, each pointing fingers, while Jaime watched silently, torn between family loyalty and the growing realization that their enemies were far more formidable than they had imagined. Ned moved carefully, avoiding direct confrontation with Cersei's forces inside the Red Keep. Instead, he focused on control over key points, the armories, the city gates, and the rooftops overlooking strategic streets. Each move was subtle but deliberate, weakening the Lannisters' influence without exposing his family to danger. Sansa coordinated minor nobles, ensuring that resources and messages reached the right people at the right time, while Arya's intelligence network identified patrol weaknesses and hidden threats. The girls had become indispensable, their training and courage making them critical assets in Ned's strategy. Then came the first open clash. Lannister forces, frustrated by their failures, attempted a raid to flush out Stark loyalists. Ned had anticipated it. Hidden archers and strategically placed contingents ambushed the attackers, cutting off escape routes and forcing surrender. The confrontation was quick and decisive, a display of strength that shocked both the city and the Lannisters. News spread rapidly. The dead man was not only alive, but capable of commanding precise military action. Whispers in the streets grew bolder. Citizens who had once cowered behind closed doors now dared to speak of hope. Cersei's desperation escalated. She sent spies into Ned's hidden network, but misinformation and carefully planted traps led to several failures. Tyrion advised patience, using the Queen's paranoia against her. Each failed attempt further weakened her grip on the city. Even some of her more loyal soldiers began to question the wisdom of following orders that seemed doomed to fail. The balance of power, once firmly in the Lannisters' hands, was shifting, and Ned was orchestrating every move with careful precision. Amid the chaos, Ned Stark made his presence known to the crown in subtle but undeniable ways. Messages delivered through captured guards, sightings orchestrated by loyalists, and rumors carefully seeded through the city created an aura of inevitability. Ned was coming, and resistance would be costly. The people of King's Landing, long oppressed, began to quietly rally behind him. They left small banners in windows, spoke his name with cautious reverence, and provided assistance where possible. By nightfall, the first major clash had solidified Ned's reputation. The Lannisters, shaken by coordinated strikes and the growing loyalty toward the Stark cause, began reassessing their strategy. Cersei's paranoia intensified, Joffrey's confidence waned, and James struggled with conflicting loyalties. Ned, from his hidden vantage points, watched the city stir with both fear and hope. The battle was far from over, but the scales had begun to tip. Ned Stark, the man who had survived betrayal and execution, was no longer a shadow in King's Landing. He was a force, calculated, relentless, and inevitable. The first major clash had been won, and the stage was set for the final confrontation that could determine the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. The city had changed. King's Landing, once a place of unchallenged Lannister dominance, now pulsed with uncertainty. The streets whispered of rebellion, loyalty, and survival, all under the careful orchestration of Ned Stark. Every alley, every market, every quiet rooftop had become part of his plan, each piece moving toward a larger goal, confronting the Lannisters and reclaiming the city. But Ned knew the final confrontation could not be rushed. It had to be executed with precision, patience, and cunning. One wrong move could mean death, not just for him, but for his family and the countless innocents caught in the crossfire. Cersei, frantic and increasingly isolated, tightened her grip on the Red Keep. She summoned every available loyalist and mercenary, deploying them to choke points where Ned's influence had been felt. Her orders were strict, her punishments ruthless, but even fear could not restore control over a city that had begun to see the Stark name as more than a story of honor. It was now a symbol of resistance. Rumors spread. Ned Stark had allies in places no one could suspect, from the docks to the towers overlooking the city. Each whisper further destabilized the Queen's authority, leaving her paranoid and reactive. Ned used this to his advantage. Through his network of spies, scouts, and loyalists, he began mapping every movement of the Lannister forces. Each patrol route, each guard rotation, each supply shipment was recorded and exploited. He orchestrated minor skirmishes to draw attention to specific areas, masking his true intent, the infiltration of the Red Keep itself. Arya and Sansa, now skilled in their respective roles, coordinated small units of loyalists, ensuring that every part of the city remained aligned with their plan. Their presence and bravery gave Ned leverage that even Cersei could not fully predict. The first strike into the Red Keep came with stealth and precision. Ned's loyalists silently disabled key entry points and neutralized guards without raising alarm. The city above remained unaware, continuing to whisper of the ghost Stark, moving unseen. Meanwhile, Ned's intelligence network fed false information to Cersei, making her believe the threat was coming from a different direction. Confusion reigned inside the keep, and the Lannisters' nerves were fraying. Even Jaime, conflicted and wary, began to see cracks in the crown's defenses he could not ignore. In the streets, the common people subtly aligned with Ned's plans. Merchants delayed deliveries, artisans provided hidden weapons, and servants moved messages between loyalists. These small acts, seemingly insignificant, were crucial to the larger strategy. Ned knew that real power in King's Landing came not just from swords, but from control over information, perception, and morale. Every whisper in the city reinforced his position and weakened the Lannisters' sense of absolute control. Yet despite the growing momentum, Ned remained cautious. He could feel the tension in the air, the danger hiding behind every corner. Assassins, mercenaries, and spies could strike at any moment, and the Lannisters were not the only ones who might attempt betrayal. Littlefinger, for example, continued to move in the shadows, offering aid and intelligence, but always with motives that only partially aligned with Ned's goals. Trust, Ned reminded himself, was never absolute in King's Landing. Every alliance was a tool, every friend a potential liability. Even with all the planning, Ned felt the weight of the approaching climax. The Red Keep loomed above him like a challenge, its towers filled with enemies and spies, its walls a reminder of the treachery that had once brought him to the executioner's block. Yet he also saw opportunity. The Lannisters had grown overconfident, believing themselves untouchable. Their arrogance, combined with his careful strategy and loyal allies, created the perfect conditions for a decisive confrontation. As night fell over the city, Ned gathered his closest lieutenants. Tyrion, Arya, and Sansa stood with him, each aware of the dangers ahead. Every instruction was precise, every role defined. They would move at dawn, striking first in the areas that would destabilize the Lannisters' hold without risking civilian lives. Ned's presence inspired quiet determination. His survival had already changed the course of the city, but the next step would decide how far that change could go. The streets slept uneasily under the shadow of the coming storm. King's Landing had shifted, its people whispering of hope, resistance, and vengeance. Ned Stark, once thought dead, was now a living force, a wolf stalking a city built on fear. The final confrontation with the Lannisters was imminent, and while the outcome remained uncertain, one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. Dawn broke over King's Landing like a pale promise, painting the city in shades of grey and gold. Ned Stark moved through the streets with a quiet intensity, flanked by his closest allies, Arya, Sansa, and Tyrion, while loyalists held strategic points along every route to the Red Keep. The air was thick with tension, the city seemed to hold its breath. Every shadow could hide an enemy, every doorway a trap. Yet Ned felt a grim determination settle in his chest. After surviving betrayal, months of careful planning, and endless danger, the time had come to confront the heart of Lannister power. The first step was precision. Ned's forces moved silently through secret passages and narrow alleys, bypassing overt patrols and exploiting weaknesses identified by Arya and Tyrion. Servants and minor nobles provided distractions, drawing guards away from key entrances. Sansa, calm and resolute, coordinated the city's hidden supporters, ensuring that each move went unnoticed by anyone loyal to Cersei. Even the common folk, emboldened by whispers of the Stark resurgence, left subtle signs of support, a locked gate here, a delayed delivery there, that reinforced Ned's advantage without exposing themselves. Inside the Red Keep, chaos began to ripple. Cersei's paranoia had already left gaps in her defenses, and Ned exploited them ruthlessly. Loyalists moved silently, securing armories and key corridors while planting false trails for the Queen's forces. The Lannisters, convinced they were prepared for every eventuality, were blindsided by the precision and coordination of attacks from all directions. Jaime, sensing that the balance of power was shifting beyond Cersei's control, hesitated at critical moments, allowing Ned's forces to gain an upper hand without direct bloodshed. Confrontation reached its first turning point in the hallways of the Red Keep. Ned's loyalists engaged small groups of Lannister soldiers, subduing them quickly and efficiently. There were no unnecessary deaths. Every strike was calculated to minimize chaos while maximizing strategic advantage. The defenders, already unnerved by months of rumor and sabotage, began to falter. Panic spread through the corridors as whispered warnings of Ned Stark's presence traveled faster than any sword could strike. The halls, once symbols of absolute power, now echoed with the uncertainty of a kingdom in upheaval. Meanwhile, Ned himself moved with purpose toward the Queen's chambers. Every step was measured, every observation recorded. The Red Keep was no longer an unassailable fortress. It had become a stage for strategy, deception, and the quiet assertion of Stark power. Tyrion and Arya acted as scouts and messengers, ensuring that communication and coordination remained flawless. Sansa, from her hidden vantage points, monitored the movements of the city's remaining loyalists, ready to adjust plans at a moment's notice. Together, they formed a network that the Lannisters could not fully anticipate. At last, Ned confronted the Lannisters directly. Cersei, furious and desperate, attempted to intimidate him with threats and insults, her composure cracking as she realized the city no longer feared her alone. Joffrey, terrified and defiant, was powerless to act, his arrogance undercut by months of miscalculation and fear. Jaime, torn between loyalty to his family and the realization that the Stark presence could not be ignored, watched silently, conflicted. Ned spoke with calm authority, outlining the consequences of continued resistance and the justice owed for treachery, yet leaving a narrow path for surrender, a calculated mix of mercy and warning. The city itself became a witness. Citizens peered from windows and doorways as the halls of the Red Keep, once closed to them in fear, now became the scene of a slow, methodical reclamation. Whispers of "Ned Stark is alive" surged through the streets, emboldening those who had quietly supported him. Even minor soldiers, previously loyal to Cersei, hesitated at orders, sensing that the tide of power had shifted irrevocably. The balance had changed. The Stark name carried weight, fear, and hope simultaneously. But the battle was far from over. While Ned had gained control of key areas and neutralized immediate threats, the Lannisters were not yet defeated. Cersei's fury and cunning remained dangerous, Joffrey's unpredictability loomed, and hidden loyalists still plotted within the shadows. Ned knew that maintaining control over the city and ensuring the safety of his family would require continued vigilance, strategy, and careful manipulation. Victory was within reach, but it had to be secured with patience and precision. As Ned stood in the quiet of the Red Keep, listening to the distant stirrings of the city he had reclaimed piece by piece, he felt the weight of months of planning and danger lift slightly. He had survived betrayal, outmaneuvered enemies, and turned kings, landing into a stage for his strategy. Yet he also understood that the climax of this struggle was not a single moment, but an ongoing challenge. The final moves were still to come, and the consequences of every decision would ripple far beyond the walls of the Red Keep. The city held its breath, uncertain whether the dawn of change would bring justice or chaos. Ned Stark moved deliberately through the Red Keep, every step measured, every decision weighed against the lives of those he had sworn to protect. Even with the city's whispers in his favor, he knew that King's Landing was a dangerous chessboard, and one miscalculation could undo everything. His family's safety remained his primary concern, but he also understood that the future of the Seven Kingdoms rested on the balance of his next moves. Cersei, trapped within her own paranoia, began to lash out unpredictably. She ordered patrols to strike in areas where Ned had already secured control, hoping to catch him or his loyalists off guard. But each effort faltered, thanks to Arya's reconnaissance and Tyrion's foresight. Even the Queen's fiercest enforcers, once confident in her authority, now questioned every command. The Lannisters' power, carefully built over decades, was unraveling under a combination of fear, misdirection, and Ned's relentless strategy. Ned took stock of his position. The Red Keep's halls were still contested, pockets of resistance remained, loyalists hidden and desperate. But the city outside, its people, its markets, and even its minor guilds were quietly aligning with him. Sansa had worked tirelessly, sending coded instructions to citizens and minor nobles alike, ensuring that if the Lannisters made any sudden moves, they would find themselves isolated. Every small act, every seemingly insignificant detail, contributed to a larger picture. The transformation of King's Landing from a city ruled by fear to one influenced by calculated Stark authority. He paused in a quiet chamber, considering the next step. Tyrion approached, his eyes reflecting both caution and excitement. "The Queen grows desperate," he said quietly. "Her orders are erratic, and many of her supporters are beginning to question their loyalty. If we move carefully, we could force her hand without shedding unnecessary blood." Ned nodded. Patience had always been a Stark's greatest weapon, and now it was more vital than ever. Any overt confrontation that risked harming innocents or his family would compromise everything he had worked to achieve. Instead, the plan was to create a situation so overwhelming, so meticulously orchestrated, that the Lannisters would have no choice but to surrender or fracture entirely. Every ally, every piece of intelligence, every subtle act of rebellion had been leading to this moment. The city itself was alive with tension. In the streets, citizens whispered about the wolf who had survived execution, about a Stark shaping events from the shadows. Minor nobles reconsidered their loyalties, merchants delayed shipments in quiet defiance, and guards hesitated at orders that once would have been obeyed without question. Ned understood the importance of perception. Controlling the narrative of fear, hope, and inevitability was as crucial as controlling the Red Keep itself. Yet he could feel the pressure mounting. Cersei's desperation made her unpredictable, and Joffrey's impulsive temper added a volatile element to every calculation. Even Jaime, conflicted as ever, could intervene in ways no one expected. The final confrontation would not be simple, nor would it be swift. Ned knew that every detail, from troop movements to alliances, from whispered messages to visible displays of authority, would determine the outcome. Victory was within reach, but it hung by a fragile thread. As night fell, Ned moved through the city once more, surveying loyalists, preparing for contingencies, and ensuring that every action taken that day aligned with the larger strategy. He could see the subtle signs of his influence everywhere: a guard's hesitation, a merchant's cooperation, a whisper of hope in the market. Each small victory reinforced the sense that King's Landing was no longer merely a Lannister stronghold. It was a city on the brink of transformation, a stage set for a reckoning that had been a long time coming. Ned allowed himself a brief, rare moment of reflection. Months of planning, evasion, and subtle manipulation had brought him to this precarious point. The final confrontation was approaching, but the outcome remained uncertain. What mattered now was precision, patience, and the stark sense of justice that had guided him through every trial. King's Landing would not fall easily, but the tide had shifted, and the wolf who had survived betrayal was ready to see it through, whatever the cost. The city slept uneasily, though few of its residents truly rested. King's Landing had changed. Every alley, rooftop, and hidden passage now carried the silent presence of Ned Stark's influence. He moved carefully, checking in with loyalists and ensuring that his network remained tight. The Red Keep loomed above him, a fortress of intrigue and danger, yet he no longer feared it in the same way he had when facing the executioner's block. Now it was a place of strategy, a stage on which every move mattered and every misstep could cost lives. Cersei's paranoia had grown unbearable. She convened her inner circle constantly, demanding updates, sending patrols, and issuing orders that sometimes contradicted one another. Joffrey's temper flared at every setback, and even Jaime found himself questioning whether continued loyalty to the crown was worth the risk. The Queen's carefully constructed empire was beginning to crack under pressure, though she would never admit it openly. Ned knew she was calculating, dangerous, and unpredictable, but he also knew she could be manipulated through perception and the careful orchestration of fear and hope. Ned continued consolidating control over the city's key positions. The docks, once vital for trade and troop movements, now held hidden Stark loyalists who could secure supply lines or prevent reinforcements from reaching the Red Keep. Merchants and guilds acted subtly, delaying shipments, misreporting inventories, and creating distractions that kept the Lannisters off balance. Each small act, each minor misdirection, was part of a larger plan, one that would culminate in a confrontation designed to shift the balance of power decisively in Ned's favor. Arya moved like a shadow, slipping through alleys and corridors to gather intelligence. She relayed key information to Ned and Tyrion, ensuring that every action could be precise and effective. Sansa coordinated with minor nobles, convincing them that resistance against the Lannisters was not only safe but inevitable. The girls' combined efforts had transformed the Stark presence in King's landing from a whisper into a tangible, growing force, one that could no longer be ignored by the crown. Despite the careful planning, Ned felt the tension building. He knew that the final confrontation with Cersei and the remaining loyalists would not be simple or bloodless. Hidden assassins, mercenaries, and spies still threatened him at every turn. Joffrey's unpredictability could spark chaos in moments, while Cersei's cunning made her a dangerous opponent in any negotiation. Yet every day, Ned saw signs that the city was slowly tilting toward his favor. Fear, loyalty, and hope were all shifting, and the Lannisters were beginning to sense the change, even if they could not yet grasp its full magnitude. Ned began setting the stage for the decisive sequence of actions. Guards loyal to the Starks took positions around the Red Keep's entrances and key corridors, while hidden routes allowed for rapid movement if confrontation turned violent. Messages and misinformation were spread carefully to confuse and manipulate the remaining Lannister supporters. Tyrion provided guidance on court politics and vulnerabilities within the Crown's inner circle, while Arya and Sansa ensured communication and coordination throughout the city. The first visible signs of Ned's impending move appeared as controlled disturbances in the streets, suspicious activity, blocked routes, and minor skirmishes that tested the Lannisters' reactions. The people, sensing something monumental approaching, began to watch from windows and rooftops. Some whispered words of hope, others silently prepared to assist if the Starks struck openly. Ned knew that perception was as important as action. He needed the city itself to reinforce his presence and make resistance increasingly untenable. As the night deepened, Ned paused atop a hidden tower overlooking the Red Keep. The lights flickered in the streets below, the city murmuring with anticipation. He could see Cersei's patrols moving uncertainly, guards hesitating, and even some of the Queen's allies questioning their loyalties. The moment was nearing. The tipping point that could decide control of King's Landing was approaching. Yet Ned remained calm, understanding that haste could destroy everything he had built. Patience, strategy, and subtlety had carried him this far. Now, they would determine the outcome of the final moves. Ned Stark, the man who had survived betrayal, execution, and near-impossible odds, felt the weight of the coming confrontation settle on his shoulders. The city was primed, the pieces in place, and the Lannisters were beginning to sense that their control had slipped. The final act had not yet begun, but the stage was set. Every shadow, every whisper, every loyal ally and cautious citizen was ready to play their part in the reckoning that was about to unfold. The city stirred with uneasy energy as dawn approached. King's Landing seemed to sense the change in the air, the tension almost palpable in every alley and square. Ned Stark moved quietly through the streets with his closest allies, reviewing final details and ensuring that every loyalist was in position. Months of careful planning, patience, and subtle manipulation had brought them to the brink of something monumental. Now the culmination of strategy, intelligence, and courage would be tested against the stubborn grip of the Lannisters. Inside the Red Keep, Cersei paced, her fury barely contained. Each failure to locate or confront Ned sharpened her paranoia. Guards who had once moved with confidence now hesitated, their loyalty shaken by months of misinformation and sabotage. Joffrey's temper flared unpredictably, yet even his impulsive strikes yielded little progress. Jaime, observing the cracks in both his sister's control and the city's obedience, weighed his choices carefully. Even he knew that the tide had shifted. The wolf, who had survived execution, was now a force that could not be dismissed. Ned reviewed his network of allies one last time. Tyrion provided intelligence on key points of weakness within the Red Keep, indicating where loyalists could move without raising suspicion. Arya and Sansa coordinated routes for communication and observation, ensuring that every passage, corridor, and rooftop was accounted for. Even minor nobles and merchants had been woven into the plan, their small but crucial contributions reinforcing the network of control that Ned had built across the city. The first subtle moves began at dawn. Lannister patrols, carefully monitored and misdirected, found themselves in positions that made their response slow and confused. Strategic closures of streets, delayed reinforcements, and well-timed diversions forced their commanders to make decisions under pressure, often contradictory and hurried. The city, guided by the invisible hand of Ned Stark, now functioned as a single entity moving toward destabilizing the crown without exposing innocent lives to unnecessary danger. Every action was precise. Key corridors within the Red Keep were secured by loyalists, minor skirmishes eliminated threats quietly, and misinformation ensured that Cersei remained uncertain of where Ned himself might strike. The Queen's orders became inconsistent. Some areas were overdefended, while others were left vulnerable. The balance of power, long thought immutable, was fractured before the eyes of everyone in the city. Outside the keep, the citizens felt the tension and responded in subtle ways. Hidden signals marked safe routes for loyalists, minor disturbances created distractions, and whispers of hope spread through the markets and alleys. Ned understood that King's Landing itself had become an ally, its people emboldened by months of careful influence and small victories. Their support, quiet yet unwavering, was as important as any sword or blade in the coming confrontation. Despite the progress, Ned remained vigilant. The Lannister's cunning and ruthlessness were far from extinguished. Hidden loyalists, assassins, and spies still moved in the shadows, any of whom could strike unexpectedly. Joffrey's recklessness and Cersei's desperation added further danger to every calculation. Each move had to account for the unpredictable, the desperate, and the deadly. Victory would not be won by brute force alone. It required patience, timing, and an unerring sense of strategy. As the first light of morning broke over the city, Ned Stark paused on a rooftop overlooking the Red Keep. He could see guards moving nervously, citizens peering from windows, and allies positioning themselves according to the plan. The moment of reckoning was close, but the final confrontation had not yet begun. Every decision, every whisper, every hidden maneuver would soon converge. The city, the crown, and the Stark name were all poised on the edge of history. Ned Stark, survivor of betrayal and execution, watched silently as the city stirred below. He was ready, not merely to confront the Lannisters, but to reshape the fate of King's Landing itself. The final moves were approaching, and the tension in the air promised a confrontation that could change the Seven Kingdoms forever. The city trembled under the weight of inevitability. By midday, Ned Stark had positioned his loyalists throughout King's Landing. The Red Keep, once a symbol of Lannister dominance, now felt vulnerable, its corridors infiltrated, its guards misdirected, and its leadership paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. Ned knew the time had come. There was no longer room for subtlety. The final confrontation would decide the fate of the city, his family, and the Seven Kingdoms. He entered the throne room quietly, flanked by Eddard and Turpin, while Sansa coordinated messages to the city outside, ensuring that civilians and loyalists remained safe. Sansa rose from her seat, fury radiating from every line of her face. Joffrey flinched beside her, unsure whether to strike, scream, or flee. Jumma stood silently at the Queen's side, conflicted but restrained. The tension in the room was palpable, every eye on Ned, the man they had once believed dead. "Sansa," Ned said, his voice calm but firm, "your reign of terror ends today. The people, the city, and justice demand it. Surrender now, and no more blood will be spilled unnecessarily. Resist, and the consequences will fall upon you, your family, and the city itself." Sansa's lips curled in a sneer. "You think a Stark can intimidate the lion? The crown is mine, and I will not bow to a man who hides in shadows." Ned's gaze did not waver. "I do not hide, I survive, I act, and King's Landing has already shifted beneath your feet." Outside the Red Keep, citizens moved subtly but purposefully. Lannister loyalists hesitated at orders, minor nobles switched allegiances quietly. The city itself had been prepared by months of strategy, sabotage, and careful manipulation. The tide had turned. The crown's grip on power weakened visibly, and even the bravest soldiers felt the shift in momentum. The confrontation inside the throne room was swift and precise. Ned's loyalists moved to neutralize Sansa's guards without unnecessary bloodshed. Joffrey, panicked and overwhelmed, was restrained, his arrogance offering no protection. Turpin worked to negotiate the surrender of key supporters, ensuring the conflict did not escalate beyond control. Eddard, silent and lethal, ensured that any remaining threats were neutralized before they could harm innocents. Finally, Sansa found herself cornered. Her fury had no allies to reinforce it. Every attempt to manipulate or intimidate failed. Ned offered her one final chance, a surrender that preserved her life but stripped her of power. Realizing the inevitability of defeat, she agreed reluctantly. The city's fear of Lannister cruelty shifted instantly to awe of Stark decisiveness and justice. With the Lannisters removed from immediate power, Ned ensured that order was restored carefully. He established a council composed of loyalists, moderate nobles, and trusted advisors like Turpin to manage King's Landing fairly. The common people, long oppressed, began to see a future free from arbitrary cruelty. Sansa and Arya, now seasoned by survival and cunning, assisted in stabilizing the city, and unsung justice was measured, not vengeful. In the aftermath, Ned Stark reflected on the months of survival, strategy, and careful planning that had brought him to this point. He had endured betrayal, watched his family scattered, and faced death itself. Yet through patience, intelligence, and unwavering resolve, he had reclaimed the city, protected his family, and reshaped the destiny of the Seven Kingdoms. The wolf had not only survived, the wolf had triumphed. As the sun set over King's Landing, its light glinting off the walls of the Red Keep, Ned looked out across the city. The streets were alive with cautious hope, the people beginning to rebuild, and the echoes of Lannister tyranny fading. The battle was over, but vigilance remained. Ned knew that justice, honor, and survival were ongoing struggles, yet for the first time, the Seven Kingdoms felt the weight of a Stark steady hand guiding them toward balance. Ned Stark, once betrayed and almost executed, had survived. He had outmaneuvered enemies, reclaimed his family's honor, and altered the fate of a kingdom. King's Landing would never forget the wolf who had walked through fire and emerged not only alive, but victorious.